I want people to understand, because this is something that people seem to be very confused about, that you bring up a lot. So what people hear you say is that I can predict Tom Bilyeu, I can predict your death within a month, right?
Right.
Versus what you just said, which is, hopefully you can clip this out and play it around, that what you're actually saying is the models simply predict when you're going to hit the center of that. You're as likely to be alive as dead. This is statistical over a whole lot of people. This is not an individual's life. This is plugging in risk factors, figuring out what risk factors you have and where that would put you on this bell curve of alive or dead. And it's interesting because you've said something I heard Elon Musk say, which makes a lot of sense to me, which is, if you really want to know whether something matters or not, look at what the insurance companies do. And I think he was saying that in reference to whether the vaccines have any sort of impact on heart disease. And he was just like, watch what the insurance companies do. Now, I may be wrong about that. I want to be very clear. I don't want to misquote him.
Can you also can you also go to Fasano, Fasano and Associates? Just pull up that website. This is the largest life expectancy prediction company in the country. So this wasn't just work that I did. See how it says our specialties include life expectancies? Just go down, and it will show you that they do life expectancy predictions for annuities, for reverse mortgages, for life insurance. This is some of the most accurate science in the world. I mean, if you think about, and they actually put their the accuracy data for their life expectancies on here. How close to the median bell curve prediction were they? How far off of the standard deviation were they?
So they're publishing their data on, or making available, if you're a subscriber or however they monetize, they make those risk factor clusters known, and like, hey, if you smoke and you drink and you're sedentary, you're going to be dead at 63.
So when you look at life expectancy, and I'm glad we're actually going to get into this, because I've never really had a chance to defend that. Like when I gave Dana White 10.4 years to live, and by the way, I've only done life expectancy for one person since I left that industry almost 9 years ago, and it was Dana White. I don't want to be known for being the guy that predicts life expectancy anymore. I don't even use that database any longer.
It's so emotionally powerful that while I get it's actually just a statistical proxy, I understand why the world has glommed onto this.
Yes.
And I think it behooves people. In fact, let me just do a PSA really fast. I think it behooves everybody, especially those people that I love, that know that they are living a lifestyle that is not good, to see, hey, if you do these behaviors, it's going to have this impact on your life. Now, why do I say this? As a guy who develops video games for a living, I'm telling you right now, anything that you can gamify, the reason I wear an Oura ring is it lets me gamify my sleep. I suddenly care because I can adjust my score, and it's fun.
So true.
And if you can, and Dana talked about this in the interview you did with him, he's like, oh, starting to feel better and knowing what my blood levels are that correlate to how I feel is fun. I like doing it. I like trying to optimize my blood. And so in business, they always say what gets measured gets improved.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good, even though it's just a statistical proxy. It is not your destiny. It is not saying that you actually are going to die this day in a car accident or from lung cancer or whatever.
Right.
It's just saying, hey, people that have these patterns statistically end up with this outcome. So it's good.
And by the way, it's very accurate. So I don't want to like downplay it either. You know, these life expectancies are extraordinarily accurate. If you look at, I mean, if you want to know how good life insurance companies are at predicting mortality, just look at what happened in the 2008-2009 financial services crisis.
Profit margins, don't they have a legal obligation to pay out 91%?
Yeah, they have 98% of all life insurance never pays a death claim. 98% of all life insurance policies lapse. Only 2% of life insurance policies actually pay a death claim.
Whoa.
98% of all life insurance policies lapse.
Well, that's why they didn't go out of business.
Yeah, that's why they didn't
People
go out of
just
business.
pay for a while and then stop.
Yeah. So we had, 364 banks fail? You didn't have one life insurance company fail. Not
that
one.
doesn't tell me that their data is good. It tells me that 98% of people lapse their policy and they're just raking in the money.
Where their data gets good is that the data that they have, which doesn't exist in other clinical studies or hospital chains or research foundations for universities, is that they know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for 370 million lives, or maybe even more.
Basically,
and
AI. They've created an AI model that predicts how and when you're going to die.
They can pull that in. And so there are what we call mortality factors, right? There are credits and there's debits. And then there's something called comorbidities, right? So you're on an actuarial curve, I'm on an actuarial curve, everybody in this room is on one, right?
How dare you?
How dare you?
I'm going to live forever, Gary. Didn't you know?
You can defy the odds, but you're on one, brother.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, you're a 37-year-old male, you have a life expectancy of X, so bang. But the life insurance company doesn't care where you are on an actuarial curve, right? They want your specific mortality before they put $50 million or $75 million worth of risk on your life. Because if they do, only one thing matters.
Do they DNA test?
They do now.
Oof.
Yeah.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, they do now.
Do I love that or do I hate that? As an entrepreneur, I love it because it means that you can get better. As a person that may want a life insurance policy at some point, I hate it. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was allowed, in that underwriting department, you could get a blood test once, but pretty much any blood marker that you wanted. So if you wanted to see if their chances of something that was chronic becoming non-chronic, or you wanted to, for example, we would see vast amount of misdiagnosis in medical records. And that's what I did. I didn't get my knowledge even from the 8 years of undergrad and grad school I went to. I went to undergraduate for biology. I went to grad school for human biology. So I have another 4-year degree in human biology, where I really got the majority of my knowledge was from reading medical records 8 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week for almost 20 years. All I did was do medical record extraction. When you start reading that voluminous amount of medical records, you start to see how the practice of medicine is done, and you start to see the patterns in the practice of medicine, and you start to see the downside because you see the number of misdiagnoses that are going on. Where patients that have simple nutrient deficiencies like vitamin D3 are diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, put on a corticosteroid, which eats their joints over the next 6 years, causes them to have a joint replacement, and then reduces their mobility, what we call your ambulatory profile, and then brings in all of the diseases from further down your future that exacerbate with reduced mobility. And you find that so many of these things, methotrexate that they put people on for arthritic conditions, which gives you an MTHFR gene mutation that you didn't have, shuts down the ability for your body to use folate and turn it into methylfolate, creating this massive deficiency. And initially it's put into your body to be anti-inflammatory, but now it actually shuts your gut down, disrupts your mood, begins to cause contents in your gut to putrefy. And you develop not only gut issues, which is the primary result of these pharmaceuticals, but you also start to get mood disorders and personality alterations because you now are creating a deficiency in the body that you didn't otherwise create. The same thing, by the way, we would see in cholesterol statin medications. Prolonged use of statins suppressing cholesterol, which is a construction material, not a fuel source. It is a construction material that we use to make every cell wall, every cell membrane, and every hormone in the human body. When we start to deplete these fuel sources, you would begin to see significant hormone disruption and other consequences down the line of over suppressing cholesterol in the body. You see the same thing in psychiatric medications. The studies are being published now that we actually saw the damage from during my career, and that is that we knew that people that were on antidepressants for prolonged periods of time had significantly higher rates of suicide, and nobody was talking about it. They had significantly more severe depression when they got off. They reported massive, what they would call crushing depression after prolonged use of antidepressants. And prolonged use of antidepressants, they would start to go into their primary care and their psychiatrist and complain that they were actually starting to have suicidal thoughts that were leading them to certain actions. And you would see this in the medical record because the patient history would be in there. And so you saw this voluminous amount of not just medical misdiagnosis, but this voluminous amount of modifiable risk factors that were in the mortality prediction. So you put somebody onto a bell curve, and now we're trying to decide, are they going to die earlier than their average population, or are they going to die later than their average population? And so you start to take away what's called mortality debits. They have diabetes, they're hypertensive, they're morbidly obese. And each one of those would give you a debit. But if you had all three of those in the same biome, they would get a massive debit, because being morbidly obese, type 2 diabetic, and hypertensive in the same body is way worse than having any one of those conditions on their own. So these were called comorbidities, and they would dramatically accelerate your rate of death, right? They would move you way to the left of the bell curve. And what was astounding was that the majority of these factors that were moving people from the center of the bell curve, of the mortality curve, to the left, meaning they were going to die earlier. This was called the mortality multiplier, the statistical chance that they would die before the mean, right? This is called the mortality multiplier. What was moving people to the left were modifiable risk factors, meaning had I just been able to get on the phone and contact that person, I could have made a dramatic change.
What are the standard ones? Smoking, being sedentary, loss of muscle mass.
Smoking, being sedentary, loss of muscle mass. I mean, there, clearly sarcopenia, age-related muscle wasting, which is why you hear a lot of people say if you want to live a long time, lift heavy weight. That's actually very, very true. But things like, like you would see anemia, for example.
Is this a super common one?
Super common. People are anemic. And why are they anemic?
As they're getting older?
Yes, as they're getting older, but it's getting into younger and younger ages. In people in their early 50s, late 40s, mid 40s are having hormone imbalance. And why are they having hormone imbalances? Not because their hormones are necessarily, their testicles, for example, have lost the ability to secrete testosterone, but because they have deficiencies in things like DHEA and vitamin D3.
The building blocks of
the building blocks, right? Like, remember we talked about earlier that we said, a lot of reasons why people will come into one of our clinics, right? And they'll say, I'm low on energy. So when somebody says I'm low on energy, we just convert that to physiology. If you tell me you're low on energy, what you're really saying is I'm low on oxygen, right? And so if you're low on oxygen, one of the consequences, one of the causes of being low on oxygen is being low on red blood cells and being low on hemoglobin, right? Not anemic, but this hides in plain sight, right? Because a red blood cell carries oxygen inside of a fluid called hemoglobin. So when your red blood cell count is in the lower quartile, but it's still normal, and your hemoglobin is in the lower quartile, but it's still normal, this starts to compound, meaning it starts to reduce the oxidative state in the blood. You're carrying less oxygen. Well, if you go to the place in the body where red blood cells and hemoglobin are made, it's the bone marrow, right? So how do I get the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells, which would raise my energy level? You go to the boss of the bone marrow, which is the hormone testosterone. If you look at in men and women, one of the primary roles of testosterone is erythropoiesis, to put pressure on the bone marrow to create new red blood cells. This is why very often when men start hormone therapy, testosterone injections, they have to do regular blood donations, right? Because the bone marrow spits out so many red blood cells that the blood begins to thicken. It raises something called their hematocrit level. It raises their blood viscosity. So I would see in the medical record, man, this person is basically walking around anemic in plain sight. Their red blood cell count is right in the bottom quartile or bottom 10 percentile. Their hemoglobin level is super, super low. They're low on the hormone testosterone. They have no DHEA. They have no vitamin D3, and they're exhausted. And when they're exhausted, they also can't sleep. And as soon as the exhaustion would affect the sleep, then we would start to increase the rate of the debits. Because why is it that people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst? When you ask a doctor, why is it that most people, the people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst? Because you would think it would be the opposite, right? You would think that people that are really exhausted, the one thing they would do really well is sleep. But the truth is, it's because they're both related to blood oxygen. Why are you tired? Because you're low on blood oxygen. Well, what happens when you lay down to go to bed at night? Your respiratory rate starts to fall. As your respiration rate starts to fall, the amount of oxygen coming into your blood starts to drop. Eventually, the amount of blood oxygen gets to a critical level as you're going into a delta wave of sleep. And as you start to go into that delta wave of sleep, your brain panics and it wakes you up. How does it wake you up? It pulses cortisol, right? So if you actually look at the aura ring of somebody that has low blood oxygen, you'll see that they look like a bouncing rubber ball going down the hallway at night.
Between what modes? Light sleep and
between
deep sleep?
Delta and alpha beta. And I'm not talking about... I
don't know how to read an aura ring in those ways.
Okay,
it just
so
says light,
between light
deep,
sleep
wake.
and deep sleep.
Okay.
So deep sleep, they'll bounce off the
What
ground.
should it look like? Should it look like you go light, deep, stay deep, light, wake?
Yes. I mean,
I'm a bouncing
ideally,
ball
what
then.
you would look like is you fell off a cliff and you laid at the bottom of the cliff for a while and then you pop back out.
That is not what mine looks like. I worry that mine looks like the bouncing ball you're describing.
'Cause your
Not I
mind is
worry. So
waking you up.
I bounce back and forth between light. So mine will go fall asleep fast. I'll go light for pretty brief, then deep, but then I'll pop back up to light, then deep.
Yep.
Then I'll go light, wake, then light, deep, light, deep, light, and then wake.
Yeah, so it
That's
looks like
my
it's
typical,
blue and then it gets white and then it goes back down. It looks like broken teeth kind of.
Yes, I only hit white usually once to twice a night, but I bounce back and forth between light and deep.
So what's happening there? So yours isn't happening because you're exhausted, but when people are, this is why people that go on hormone therapy sometimes feel so good, right? Because what happens is when we normalize the level or optimize the level of testosterone, and if you actually want to look at the studies on this, you can go to the 2018 Journal of American Urology. So you see here that clinicians, so this is according to this is the Bible, by the way.
All right, let me just read this. Clinicians should inform testosterone deficient patients that low testosterone is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease.
Risk factor for cardiovascular disease, not the other way
Strong
around.
evidence.
There is strong evidence. So in other words, if I'm your doctor, and for the record, I'm not a doctor, I'm a human biologist, but if I'm your doctor and you're low on testosterone, what should I inform you will happen if you get on hormone therapy? Well, first I
always thought I wanted to leave my testosterone alone as long as humanly possible.
You do. This is why
Sort of. I want to get it up if it's low.
you want to get it up if it's low by giving your body the raw material to make it on its own. So you want to look
Facts.
at your DHEA level, your vitamin D3 level, and you want to look at a very specific protein
How
in
do I
the
get
blood.
DHEA?
Just pull DHEA on your blood.
No, how do I eat it? How do I consume it?
Well, the best way is to supplement with it, but you can get dihydroepiandrosterone from certain cruciferous vegetables, but
100,000 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to supplement. So what would I do? Chew on the bark of a tree, eat
cruciferous
grass.
vegetables.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to go into carnivore versus vegan at some point here.
Yeah, I mean that's. I'm ready. Are you a vegan?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
'Cause
But
we'll
I
have a heck
have no
of a debate
philosophical
on that.
thing. I just want what's effective.
Carnivore is very effective.
But you just said to eat cruciferous vegetables to avoid low testosterone.
Yeah, but you could also eat grass-fed meats. I mean, grass-fed meats, and I'll give you a whole. We can talk about grass-fed meats, eggs, raw dairy, pasture-raised chickens, pasture-raised eggs. Again, the problem is it's not the meat. It's the industrial processed meat. I mean, grass-fed meat is excellent for you. So are pasture-raised eggs. In fact, the only thing of any consequence when you're buying eggs is that they should be pasture-raised, not that they're cage-free, because that just means that chicken's out of the cage when they feed
You
them
want
a
them
bunch of shit.
eating worms and bugs.
You want them eating worms, bugs, and grass. I mean, just like when a cow eats grass, it doesn't just eat the grass. It actually gets soil. It actually gets minerals, zinc, magnesium, nutrients from the soil. But if you see here, patients should be informed that testosterone therapy may result in improvements in erectile function, low sex drive, anemia, bone mineral density, lean body mass, and or depressive symptoms.
All right,